Right on. Oh, there's a few more folks. Right on. Okay. Wow, everybody's quiet. Cool. That's bizarre for a bunch of people who I'm sure at least some of you are writers and musicians in this crowd, I'm sure too. I'm super excited to be here with Nikita Carter. So first, I want to do a territory acknowledgement of where we are on this stolen territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I want to say that first. I'm Trevana Spilchen. I'm a musician, a parent of 4 kids. I've been a part of the spoken word community for a long, long time here in Vancouver. My heritage is Ukrainian. From Litsivka in Ukraine and from Celtic origins as well. So I'm super happy to be moderating this talk, and that's a bit about who I am. All right, so without further ado, this wonderful person sitting beside me here is Nikita Carter. So wonderful round of applause for
So I'm just going to say that I'm, for almost 55 years, I've been in the music world, and it's just in August of this year that I became a published author. I identify as a musician, and part of drawing us together and focusing us being together, for me, revolves around sound, and sound is vibration. And so I'm just going to play a little bit to conjure that and to make that offering to everyone here as my first offering. And thank you to so many wonderful friends and new people who I maybe get a chance to speak with today, but thank you for so many friends coming and being supportive. I'm really, really touched, and it means a great deal to me. I am figuring all this stuff out about being a book person. So, and some, wonderful support. I'll say more later. So this book was almost it was 9 years in the creation and the writing, and it came out of trying to make sense of things when I didn't have anyone to talk with to make sense of things. So, and that sounds very cryptic, but it's really about my gender transition and going through that at an older age when most people transition in their 20s or 30s or even younger. And for me, it was in my 60s. Now into my 70s, and still trying to make sense of so many ways to be in the world, and my understanding of the dynamics of communication, how to go in the world, how to bring the knowledge I have from a lifetime lived as a privileged white male, for 60 years, and now being on the other end of the spectrum of that societal power dynamic. So I'm really so grateful to Margot Wilson, who's the publisher at Transgender Publishing, who we Zoomed every Thursday for several years, and she never once asked me to read even a word to her. We just got to know each other and became very good friends. And in February, I sent her the book. So that was that, and she trusted me, and we became very good friends. So I just wanted to just say how grateful I am to her for that. And now I can go around saying stuff like, so I'm a published author. So I'm going to just read a little portion. So this is from a section or a chapter or whatever, not a chapter. It's called A Series of Opportunities. What does it take for anyone to change? I don't mean a haircut or a diet. I mean to catalyze the kind of profound change where you would not dare go unless it was seemingly a life or death choice. When you feel as if you have no other credible option, what does it take? Where you step into a discomfort zone, where every one of us instinctively knows it's not safe, and from which you will not emerge as the same being. To live as a trans person means to risk ridicule, loss of friends, loss of career, colleagues, and credibility, and to even seemingly invite physical assault. It means to become invisible because there is no social price to be paid for treating someone who is trans in those ways. Trans folks don't have any social capital. So we are treated as inconsequential, disposable. Imagine what it is to embrace a complete reboot of oneself from the ground up. In truth, I don't think it's really possible unless you are compelled to occupy that crucible. The implications are all encompassing, but may not be truly apparent as the threads spread out through every aspect of your life. For me, it took a number of harsh traumas in a very short period of time to break me open, to let me see more clearly who I am, and to truly live in balance for the first time in my life. I had no idea that would be the result. On the face of it, you'd think we'd all welcome being our authentic self. But we have all been taught and poorly trained from the beginning to fear change. And this fear is not just confined to our learned behavior and roles, though. It would seem to be in our very DNA, held in the kind of intergenerational trauma that we are all loyal to maintaining. As a shrink, who I saw in my mid-30s said, you can love your parents, but you don't have to love their shit. That was the most important thing I learned from him. Our inherent loving nature is called to be loyal and unquestioning because of our vulnerable situation as young ones. This is what I was facing and still face every single day. It's the ongoing struggle to let go of what is no longer serving me, to be true to myself and to live as fully as I'm capable of doing. Why didn't or couldn't I transition earlier in my life? Because at the time, the punishment didn't seem worth the payoff that would result.
Thank you, Nikita. And thank you for writing this book. I want to say that. I feel really honored to ask questions about it because it was really touching for me to read, and really interesting to hear the similarities in our stories, both as trans women who transition fairly late in life. Me not quite as old as you, but quite as late as you, but older. And so yeah. First off, just thank you for writing the book. Well, my first question is about this idea of the payoff not being worth the risk, And I'm wondering if you want to expand on sort of what that meant, or what it means for you thinking back now on that sort of idea.
Well, it's definitely thinking back on it, and in reflection as I'm unpacking, living my life now. I lived, my whole life. I'm a pretty open person. I'm an empath. I'm a sensitive person. But I was, I bought into the whole thing of growing up and buying into the conditioning of being an armored male, the way men are taught to always don't cry, be a man, grow a pair, all that kind of stuff from the youngest age. And so that's just what you do to survive, and you move through life and you learn to get more armored. And so even with my sensitivity and my armoring, it wasn't enough. And so at a very young age, I started to use drugs. I started to smoke pot every day not every day, but a lot from age 12. And so until I was about 40, or maybe even, almost 50. So a long time, but I haven't done drugs or alcohol for, drugs for 20 years. But that was kind of how I got through everything. And I was a doer and accomplished many things. I was a producer and I was a teacher and I did all this stuff. But it also didn't allow me to access certain parts of myself, which is I call my Nikita-ness. I wasn't able to access that. And it was with a number of traumas that happened, including a bad car accident, I had the time and the ability to start to reflect on some of what hadn't been available to me and evident to me in a personal way. And as I started to I had certain feelings come up about all this, and I started to be able to examine it and started to realize how that Nikita was this little kid looking over the top of the table and was trying to find, I guess, I never thought that would be possible. And so it's just one of those things. And you look at it growing up in the 1950s and 60s, it wasn't even a thing. Even being, a queer person was against the law until 1970, which I was almost, I was 17 at that time. So there were no examples in Winnipeg where I grew up of trans people and hardly even queer people. And so it wasn't a thing, and any of that stuff was ridiculed. And it was just far better to just stick to things that you knew you could do and be. And it wasn't even in my head, it wasn't an option. So now, in the last 10, 11 years, unpacking all that and trying to make sense of it, and you kind of, it is more possible now. There is more awareness, there is more openness around what it is to be gender divergent, or whatever, the current terminology is, that people may know. So I started to look at it, and I started to have conversations about it, and I tried talking to all kinds of people to be able to see if, it didn't even occur to me at first, of course, the idea of living my life the way I am now, 10, 11 years ago wasn't really on my radar, and to even start to think about that was very difficult. I started trying to speak to other trans people and non-binary and gender divergent people and men and women that were attracted to us and find out what their perspectives on it were. So it was kind of a huge research project into possibility. And so I started to look at that. And as I allowed myself to feel more and to see more, and then I finally took the step to say, I'm going to see what this is like to live this way for a while. And I went to Mexico and lived in Mexico for 4.5 months and came home and said, I have to do this. And so I opened the door a crack, and there it was. I had to be true to what I was finding. So the payoff became, I didn't realize how much the price would be. that has emerged consequentially afterwards. So as I say, things about losing my place in the music world and using my colleagues and open to ridicule every day, going into stores or just all this kind of stuff. So, it's hard because I'm 6'2", I've got a deep voice. I don't try and speak in a really high voice. It's just I'm me, and I just am, and my shoulders are too big, and I don't feel beautiful, and I do now, but early on, the first 5 or 6 years, I felt just I didn't fit in, and I didn't fit the mold. I didn't fit any of the ways to think about what it would be to be me in this new understanding. I had to be, little and feminine and cute as I could for a 6'2" person, and it made me not own myself, and to have the balance of my yin and yang, my feminine, and also my old self that I had for 60 years that lived in the world with power and strength and centeredness. I now can access that, and that's really just been in the last couple of years. So over this last decade, that has been, thank goodness I've been able to do that. I didn't have to live this timid, kind of frightened way, which I did for a number of years, and I didn't know how to fit in. Anyway, I kind of expounded a little bit beyond your question. But
that's the point. I think that's fantastic. I think that's great. I don't think anybody minds. Yeah, thanks. The armor thing, for me, I relate to so much. In grade 10, and I always say, people look at me now and think like, really? But grade 10, I was on the all-star team for all of Edmonton as a linebacker, as a football player. And so the armor was actual armor. I wake up some days and I have to say, okay, it's okay, Trevana, to be feminine now. It's okay.
Right.
And I have to kind of remind myself, is the payoff worth the negative now? Like you talked about not necessarily knowing what the negatives would be and stuff. How would you feel about that?
I feel the happiest and most balanced I've ever felt in my life now. I feel really centered. I feel strong. I'm not afraid of owning that strength in this new way. I don't even know how to define it yet, but I'm owning it in lots of ways, and I'm finding new things opening up for me as a result. And it's, I kind of lost my old career as a improvising musician in the avant-garde tradition. Now those doors feel closed to me, and so I'm now looking at how to launch my musical career in a new way. And it's occurring to me, I didn't want to be a dilettante and just kind of jump into something that was unrelated to who I am. And so I kind of looked at what my roots were when I first started playing. And I was a guitarist, and I was playing a variety of popular music idioms. So I'm now looking at going back to mining that area, being a songwriter, telling stories about what I'm seeing as I'm in my 8th decade now. And I don't know who will want to listen, but I feel like I have, I've lived on both sides of the Great Divide, so I have perspectives about that many people don't have, and I hopefully can, as a friend of mine who read my book recently said to me, you illuminated a lot for me. And that is kind of what I like to do. I don't want to just kind of preach to the converted. I want to talk to people who are not in the alphabet community, the LGBTQ plus community, 2S. That I want to talk about what it is to fully embrace yourself, no matter what that is. And so I think I can do that through storytelling, and I can do that through collaboration with other artists, which I've always done. And so I feel great possibility. I'm lucky to feel healthy, relatively sane, and really happy. I feel really good to get up every day. I'm taking care of myself. I'm having opportunities like this come up, which are, I couldn't have conceived of a few years ago. I mean, you could fantasize about it, but to have a chance to speak and share some of this in a room this way is incredibly meaningful to me. And so I do feel very fortunate. I'm really glad that I jumped off the cliff, as it were.
Yeah.
I'm here now.
Yeah, thank you. I feel the same way.
Yeah, I'm glad. I get that too. I feel that.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy, and there's a lot of shitty stuff about being a trans woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, as an educator, with Soji and all this stuff, I get accused of being a pedophile and a groomer, and I'm trying to convert people, and literally, like, online, and I just got myself on the protected voters list for the election because of my high profile. Like, I'm on the provincial executive for the teachers union, the BCTF. So, but at the same time, I always tell people I'm not trying to get more people to be trans, because there's pretty shitty things about being trans. But I want people to be themselves, right? And so I know you're interested in doing that work as well too. This idea of finding your voice.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things you said to me, as far as something that you wanted to get across today. And I'm wondering, I'm not going to read too much, but there's it's page 56 in the book. You speak about the roots of Black avant-garde music. You talk about that a little bit, and then there's a little bit there where you say, "Speak your truth, express who you truly are, be the manifestation of the creative force in the universe." And then I love this last one: being the individual voice spoken in community is an unstoppable power. And I'm wondering if you want to sort of elaborate on some of that sort of part of the book, and this idea of this connection between this avant-garde improvisation and finding your voice in that versus finding your voice in the world
right
now as it is.
Okay. I grew up in Winnipeg, white middle class kid. So I used to say to myself, why did a white middle class kid from Winnipeg choose to carve out a career based on inspiration from Black avant-garde improvised music coming out of jazz, and I had no good answer for really a long time. I just liked the music, I loved it, it touched me, and so on. And I read a book called Black Talk, written by a guy named Ben Sidran, and he talked about that music coming out of African music and coming out of oral culture, and I started to read more about oral culture. And in oral culture, you're taught to have your own voice. And so if you're in a group of people playing together, you're not trying to copy someone else. You are trying to fully live in who you are and express who you are through your voice, whether it's on an instrument, a drum, or whether it's a horn or whatever. And that really spoke to me, and it made me realize, my great skill of being an improviser for many times is that I've really found my voice as a saxophonist and as a composer. And you can, listen to a record of me. If you've listened to my playing, you can hear me play a note or a phrase and recognize that as me. And that is kind of what I'm talking about, where you really embody who you are. And so that was part of seeking to find my voice. And what I've found since my transition is that was me learning to recognize what that meant and to embody it and commit myself to it. And those are skills I have now, but what they are, I have them now to be able to serve my voice as Nikita. Nikita's my voice. I finally found my voice, and that's just to be myself, truly. And in my music and in my work, those are some of the tools that I have to be able to express that, to be able to put that into my work, to be able to put that into my communication with people that were, I'm being myself truly as much as I deeply know how to do. I'm trying to be open and transparent and available. And for me in my music, that's what I tried to do. But I'm living my life now that way, whereas before it was always a little bit couched in these roles of, you know, being an educator, being an artistic director, being a composer, all these different things. And now I'm just me living my life and trying to, you know, I had a health diagnosis a few years ago, and it started to occur to me, I'm 71, I don't know how much time I have left. I want to make every year really count, every day really count, and I want to live it as fully as possible. And by embracing my Nikita-ness, I am living myself as truly as I know how to be. And, you know, price is paid, but the price is, the gift that I receive for it is more than I anticipated as well. And so I feel with what I've learned and my being centered in myself now, I'm able to start to think about what it would have been like for me if I was 20 now and trying to come out, and I meet young trans people and they're really struggling at 20. You don't know who you are. You're still separating from your family. You're, what career am I going to do? What am I, you don't know. And then you're dealing with some kind of gender dysphoric issues. So I'm trying to make myself available to be a model for younger people to see what's possible in a life, to be available to talk, to be able to advocate. I do work in my acting unions, my music unions, some national artist unions, where I talk about what it is to have different voices at the table. And so I try and be one of those voices at the table. And this comes out of oral culture. I'm living my oral culture. And even though I'm starting to write now too, my real power is in expressing who I am right in this moment and speaking as honestly as I know how to do. So that comes from that oral tradition of be who you are. You know, you got 9 people playing in a group, but if you're playing with your voice, you will hear that one there. You can hear them because they have their own sound, they have their own way to play and contribute. And I think that that's true for all of us, is that we are all looking for a meaningful way to be and to contribute and to live fully. I think that's what we all want to do, is to live a meaningful life, live a loving life. And so this has been my path, and it feels like it's been pretty convoluted. And it's taken some time, and so yeah, I don't know if that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, because I think I spent a lot of time thinking, man, I wish I transitioned when I was 19, not 40. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I would have had more life on the other side. But I don't think I'd really ever thought of it as, hey, I'm transitioning later in life, but I don't have to think about all those other things of becoming an adult and all that stuff while I'm also dealing with gender.
Yeah.
And I saw that because my son is trans, and I really saw the struggle that he had in high school, of trying to find his voice while both as a trans male person, but also just as a person, and the struggles that he's faced in that. And so I really understand that. One of the things you mentioned just a little while ago is this idea of wanting to speak to people who are not part of the queer community. I'm wondering if you can quantify clearly what you want to say to the people who are not part of that community. Or maybe not quantify, that's too specific, but like some kind of thing of what you would like people to know.
One of the revelations that I had about 10 years ago doing a meditative practice, kind of it's a healing practice that, the healing is just a perk, but it really is a centering process, is that I had an epiphanous understanding of how interconnected everything is. and how in the larger picture, every atom in me is connected to every atom everywhere, to everyone, to everything. And so I'm part of this flow. I am the flow. We are the flow. And so for me, that's kind of what I'm trying to embody and share and raise our consciousness vibration so that we are understanding that we're all manifestations that are connected. And so we're so taught to be separate. You know, I was taught to be separate and to be alone and to be afraid and to have to be tough and to all that stuff. And it's not true. And we're taught that it's true, that we're separate, and that if we're going to survive, we have to, this is mine. You can't have any of this. I worked for it. You didn't work for it. I did. And just that whole thing. And so that's what I'm trying to live as I gain more awareness around this, is that I'm seeing the interconnectedness that I have and that we all have. And so I just want to be embodying that and talking about it and trying to convey that so that we all trust that that's true and start to incorporate as much of that kind of way of understanding in our lives to for our species to survive, for our life to survive, is that realizing that we need to be connected to love and to be connected to each other that way.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of the atoms.
Yeah.
I heard David Suzuki talk many, many years ago. I think the book he was speaking on was called The Sacred Balance. And he talked about the idea that you could be breathing in the same molecule of air that someone who lived 200 years ago breathed in, right? As a way of visualizing.
Bless you.
As a way of visualizing that connection. One more question. One more thing I've been thinking about a lot, which I'm wondering if you can speak to. And I was thinking about our journeys and how they both started within a few years of each other, right? At a time, I was a speaker and a participant in the Queer Rights Summit for Vancouver Pride, for Canada Pride, beginning of August. And I heard someone there say that space of time from like 2014 to the lockdown essentially to 2020 was like the golden age, they called it, of transness or gender diversity, when it really felt like 2017, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was changed, right, to add gender identity, gender expression, and a lot of that was going on. And now we're living in this place where things are not quite like that, you know. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that transition and the difference in living then versus living now. Kind of tied into this idea of, because I know I find myself trying to explain to people what the world is actually like for trans people right now, you know, and so I'm wondering with that difference if there's anything that you want to speak to around that.
I came out publicly on April 13th, 2016. April 13th, 2016. So I was kind of in the middle of that period you're describing and just emerging, and I was at a place of dewy-eyed infancy, if you will. I always joke and say, human years, there's 7 dog years for 1 human year. There's 3 trans years for 1 human year. So I'm 27. So in 2017 I was 3, 2018 I was 6. So it's been a fast progression, but during those early times it was really, I was still so caught up in the newness of it and not understanding some of the implications of things, and a lot of learning. And so I was very self-centered around it all. But it's been in the last few years, kind of post-COVID, where I'm, in my 20s now, And so I can, I'm seeing things differently. And so it's more in terms of feeling my own power and what I can do. And it's really obvious the political pushback against trans healthcare, their legitimacy, their safety. All that stuff has become really this huge pushback, and you see it in politics. In this election coming up, Pierre Poilievre wants to take healthcare away, and you see it in the American elections. All this kind of stuff about vilifying and demonizing anybody that's different.
John Restad too.
Yeah, well, that's very much in BC politics. You know, it's hard enough to change yourself, never mind change someone else. So I try and initiate conversations about these things, and I always feel when you talk and you share, you can enlighten yourself, and you can be enlightened with conversation and learning. So that's kind of what I'm trying to bring to all these kinds of ways to be in the world, the politics of it, how to fit in, how to be visible, how to tell your story, and how to not be afraid and find your strength. And that's something that we can all relate to, is how do I be strong? How do I be vulnerable? How do I live in the world the best life I can live? And so I'm just working on that. And I wasn't asking questions like that 20 years ago when I was 50, and I wasn't asking it when I was 30. But I'm starting to ask it, and it's one of the gifts, I think, as getting older, is that I see the timeline more clearly, and I see the end of the runway. I've got a year, 2, 10, 20, I don't know. We all have that question, but for me 20 years ago, that wasn't top of my list. I thought I was going to, I just continued as if there would always be tomorrow. So I'm thinking differently, and I'm also seeing, I don't have kids, but I sort of see, a 5-year-old now, and you kind of go, wow, okay, they're just starting to figure stuff out. And, how do you change the world so it's a better place for them to grow up, and for us to live and to relate, and again, to be in harmony in some kind of a fashion, I know it sounds awfully cornball to say that stuff, but but it's kind of what has become more apparent to me by living in my truth and being as more connected to myself, is that I have more of an understanding of larger picture things like that.
You mentioned 5-year-old. I have a 6-year-old.
Right.
I have 4 kids, as I mentioned, and one of them's only 6, and I think about that future all the time.
Yeah.
And I also have 3 in their 20s, and been thinking about that future for a long time. I also want you to know that I'm totally stealing that 3 trans years for every. That is so good.
I've copyrighted it. But
Well, have you actually
you can
copyrighted?
pay. No, I'm just joking. You pay royalties.
I'll pay your royalties. That's good. I've been to that. There won't be very many because I broke, but I'll pay you
It's
some.
all good.
I'll figure it out. One last question for me. I thought it was a really interesting choice with the book to end the book the way you did.
Right.
With, I think you used the words sobering thought, or sobering
Cautionary tale.
Cautionary tale is the name of the thing.
Yeah.
But in there somewhere you
Right.
talked about the idea of a sobering experience,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious, simply the choice to end the book in that
Right.
way.
I ended the book saying, hallelujah, I'm truly me. I'm a happy person, I'm in balance, all that kind of stuff, which I've been saying today. And the day I sent the manuscript to my editor, I got arrested and handcuffed and taken to a walled prison outside of Puerto Vallarta, where I was staying, and was really terrified. And hallelujah, I am who I am. That being said, that can happen anytime. That feels like that can happen to any trans person any day. And it can happen to any of us, true. But it would never have occurred to me at 60 years old as a privileged white male. That wouldn't happen to me. Whereas it happened to me, and it was the scariest experience I've ever had. And nobody knew where I was. And I was in this prison, and I was being railroaded and charged with doing drugs and drinking and nudity. I wasn't nude, and immorality, you know. So I just kind of wanted to end it with the sobering thought of, again, it's kind of the price that you pay for taking risk. But to also just enlighten people to understand what it is that, how life and death it can be for trans people in that kind of a way. And so, and again, I know it can happen to lots of other people. I know it happens to Indigenous people in this country who don't even have clean water. Here it is, this day of reconciliation, I guess today is. You start to realize, I mean, this is true for many people who are othered, but from my point of view, as somebody who's gone from great privilege to less than privilege, but hey, I got shoes on my feet. I'm doing okay, you know, and I'm lucky enough to be able to share some of my story like today. So, you know, it's not poor me, but it's a cautionary tale of what is possible and the difficulties and challenges. And so that's kind of why I chose to end it that way. My publisher says, "Oh, you have to write about this. You can't just end it on everything is rosy. You got to tell the story somehow and fit it into the book." And I decided to end it that way. So
yeah. Yeah, thank you. Again, thanks for writing the book. It's great. Y'all should buy it.
Yeah.
Okay, your turn. Wow, that didn't take long. That's cool. Right on. I love it. That's not like that is not like my high school students usually. Yeah.
Nikita.
Yeah.
Before you transitioned, you had a substantial profile as a professional musician.
Yeah.
When you went into this process of transition, obviously, for anybody, that's obviously a heck of a jump.
Yeah.
I wonder if you've got any examples of, from a professional perspective in the music industry, how that was received, and perhaps if you've got any stories of kind of how that actually went, because you're moving from one place to a very different place.
Yeah, well, I just felt like almost all the doors closed to me. I wrote to people at festivals I used to play at and say, hey, this is me now, this is what I'm interested in playing there or whatever, and wouldn't get emails returned, wouldn't get phone calls returned. That happened also personally in bands I had where I would contact people that played in my groups, that I did recordings with, who wouldn't return my calls, and would just, I just kind of was shocked. And I've since started to understand that, especially for lots of guys, because I was mostly working with men in that field, men can be made uncomfortable by being around a trans woman. That's kind of what my take on it is, and that's me kind of just speculating as to why that would be. The phrase that comes to mind, what if I was attracted to her? What would that make me? And so that may not be true, but that, I've been kind of trying to fish around to think about why somebody would not, and when I see them in person, they'll say, hey, how are you doing? But there's a kind of divide there. So that was really hard, and I kind of thought, oh, poor me. My 50-year career has disappeared, and all my credit, all my accolades belong to him, not to me. And so, and again, I felt devastated, and I didn't know how to deal with it, but I was lucky enough to ask myself the question, so is there an upside? And it turns out there is an upside. I don't have to drag my whole career as a avant-garde improvising musician along with me. I can actually reinvent my career the way I've reinvented my personhood. And so this is kind of what I was talking about earlier about being a storyteller and a songwriter as opposed to being a composer and working in instrumental music and choral music, doing all these different kinds of things I was doing. So that's kind of what was kind of the most difficult thing. And again, sometimes the biggest barriers or the biggest hurts are where the biggest learning can be, and the best gifts that can come. I feel like this is a gift that I hadn't anticipated and hadn't thought about it, and I was afraid of it. And now I'm kind of embracing it and trying to figure out how to make it work. Sort of how I'm doing with my being a writer. I have no idea how to do this. I don't know how to even think of myself that way. I always jokingly say, you're a published author. Somebody said that to me. I thought, oh, I'm a published author. And I think, oh, okay, well, so there you go. But I don't know how to be in that world. So now I'm talking to authors and people who write and do things. And so I'm just trying to learn as I go.
I'm not sure anybody knows how to be a writer. That's what I was thinking. Other questions? Yes, I'll go in the back. Yeah.
Just sort of curious. Always like, at what age did you get a sense that you weren't who the world saw you as? Like how young? And then what age did you kind of lock down? This is what it is.
Well, you'll have to read the book. No. I'm just joking. As a teenager, when my body was overtaken with teenage hormones, and I started to explore being sexual, I started to have, I used to see pictures of beautiful women dressed scantily, and I started to, at a certain point, I kind of realized I didn't want to just kind of be with them sexually. I kind of wanted to be them. And so that was kind of passing thoughts, but not really anything that made any sense. So going back to early teens, these things would intercede. And as I became a really experienced performer, say about 30, 35 years ago, I've always been a performer, so I'm a wild thing. I'm a pretty crazy person and so I used to go to fetish nights and parties, and I would dress up in all kinds of things, leather and rubber and mixed feminine clothing with all kinds of stuff. So it was more for play and for expression, and just living out loud. And so I did that, and and these things still crept in, and these questions crept in. But again, it was just kind of peeking over the table at different times. But it wasn't really until about after I had I had this head-on car accident, and all these in a very short period of time, and I talk about that in the book, what made it very difficult, and I ended up getting some therapy that helped me look at some things that allowed me to see it more clearly in a different way. And again, it's still like any of us, that know who we are. Do you really know everything about yourself? What have you revealed? Are there things you still hold back from your partner or from your friends? There's different layers of what is allowable. And so that's kind of that self-discovery and what's safe to reveal, what's safe to share socially or in a partnership or any of those kinds of things. I don't know if that makes sense.
I feel that so much, that peeking over, and the journey of that, and trying to figure that out. Yes, you got a question?
Well, first of all, I'm looking forward to reading the book, which I had read it already, but thank you so much for all of this. Both of you spoke about the armor that you had to wear when you were younger, which forced you to repress your feelings, something that a lot of men talk about. And I wonder how much of what your transition about Nikita is to do with having your true self repressed as opposed to a gender identity.
No, that's an interesting question. I don't really know how to answer. Gender identity is in so many ways a social construct, and masculine, feminine, and we all have different elements of those that we that we own, or what's safe to own, what's safe to express, as opposed to who your being is as a light being, as a spirit being. So I don't, it's a nuanced, a complex question to talk about.
If you want,
I'm just feeling, I'll just say that I think of it in terms of balance, and where I used to feel heavily weighted on one side, now I feel balanced now. I feel like I have access to whatever thoughts or feelings or expressions come to me without having to check to see if it's okay or if it's safe or whatever. I'm not afraid to just express and to be myself. I've kind of, jumping off that cliff to say this is me has allowed me to continue to just look at things and allow them to be examined without having to ask, is it safe or is it, I'm willing to look at it now. And I wasn't willing to do that before, it wasn't safe enough. And so it's kind of, I'm willing to look at the social gender constructs. I'm willing to look at my feelings and spirit, just as the person I perceive myself to be. And I feel like I've just got lots more learning to do, lots more growth to do. So it's a daily thing, and I'm so lucky I have some really dear friends that I have real great love and support from, who I just really feel see me without all this other stuff on top of it, who see me and love me for me. So I feel very lucky with that. It gives me the grounding to move forward, the strength to move forward, knowing that I'm loved.
I thank you. I totally understand that. Thank you. Thanks for being vulnerable, for sharing. I think one of the things I was thinking about with your question, for me, is I really felt like the armor had to be on to be male so that no one knew that I actually felt female. And then when I transitioned, I felt like I had to be hyper female to be accepted as female, right? And so it was the opposite, right? And I think one of the great gifts that I'm going to phrase it this way, Gen Z, gender diverse people have really given the world, is that you don't have to be this or this. You can be whatever in between, and I really got that from, you can be this or this, but you can also be all of this. And I really got that from Gen Z, I'll use a general term, poets in the spoken word community, who really, they really prescribe to this gender fuck kind of, this sort of, screw you, I'm who I am. And it's really helped me as a person not feel like I have to be way over here where I was way over there. So that's a really beautiful thing that I think has happened in the world, and is happening, right? Slowly but surely. Any other questions? I think we got time for just a little bit more here. Oh, maybe we don't. Yes, we do. Yeah, we're gonna keep going. I don't know who wants to go first.
Okay, well, I thought it was really poignant for you to talk about a way to be strong in your vulnerability, ceasing to perform your gender and simply to allow it to bloom outward. And I was wondering if you have any ideas, or if you can talk a little bit about how to maintain or develop your strength in your vulnerability in the face of belligerent attitudes.
In the face of?
Belligerent attitudes.
It's not really a factor for me. I have to be careful. I have to be mindful, just like all women have to, walking alone at night. Just very simple things like that. But in terms of being in the world and the awareness I have of the strength I have and what I can do and the change that I can be part of affecting, that I don't have those doubts that come from being bullied or being like verbally. I'm articulate enough that I can stand up to that kind of a thing, and I kind of still have my old male self which says, "Don't fuck with me."
I get that. 100%. I get that.
That can be female too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, totally. I know, but I wasn't when I was transitioning first. For me, to this big person, didn't feel like I could do that because it was too male, and I didn't feel female enough. I didn't feel feminine enough, so I had to kind of embrace being kind of more little, a little bit more passive and stuff. I've since found that I can be feminine and all those wonderful things that I love to be, but I can also be strong. So women aren't either in this binary, right? So yeah.
Nikita, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm so honored to hear it.
Thank
I'm so
you.
excited to be here for this book launching. One question I have is what you would tell your younger self now that you've had this opportunity to go through your journey and still continuing as we all do.
Yeah.
But what would you share with yourself? And maybe you already have spoken to your younger self.
You know, I kind of look back at it and I think, okay, so 1962, I'm 9 years old. It wasn't possible in Winnipeg to be this person. It was like going to a city where you speak a different language and people don't understand you. I guess you could use sign language and try and express things, but you couldn't get specifically what you were trying to get, if you were trying to order some food or whatever. And I just feel like it was not even possible in 1962 to do that where I grew up. And so I think it was a survival mechanism. And I think that's, historically, you look back at that time, place and time, I was lucky enough to talk to the grandmother of a friend of mine who marched with the suffragettes. And I got to talk to her about what it was like to be a woman in 1919, 1915, whatever, before the 1990. And to not be seen as a person, to not vote, to not have any political power, and to talk to her about that. Or talk, to Black Americans who, before they, the Civil Rights Act of the mid-60s, and what people grew up with, and that kind of a thing, it just wasn't possible at that time in society. And so I don't know what I could have said to myself. I think my instincts to find a loving community to be in, and I've always had really loving friends. Been fortunate enough to have, I've still got friends that I was friends with in 1968, 1969, and bigger picture say, stay the course, or whatever. Be brave, don't be afraid, follow your heart, things will unfold and unfurl and all that kind of stuff. That's a good question, though. It's always good to ask that,
It's so true what you say about it not being possible.
Yeah.
Right? Because I totally feel that. I'm really glad I didn't try to be trans in the 80s, because I don't know how that would have gone, and so yeah, it's a really interesting thought.
Chris?
First of all, congratulations, Nikita.
Thank you, fellow author.
Thank you. I'm just so happy for you to have arrived at this place in life and to have published the book. And I'm just curious about the writing process. Can you talk about that? Was it ever painful, difficult? Did you ever sort of want to give up, or did it just come out organically?
It was kind of organic. I just started writing because I couldn't find a therapist to help me talk through this stuff, who understood what it was like for a 65-year-old person thinking about transitioning and all this stuff. And I couldn't find anybody. The people I spoke to, it was different. They're used to talking to 20-year-olds and 25 and the issues that are at that age. So I just started to try and write about it. and it was kind of almost like, not a diary, but it was process to understand. And as I, about 3 years into doing that, I started to say, so what are you doing with this writing? Is there anything that could be useful from it, or is there? And then I started thinking about, could this be a help to anyone else who goes through this at an older age, or is it something that could be some insight for some younger people to see the kinds of, because I'm asking different questions than most trans people I talk to. I talk to a 30-year-old trans person. They're often not asking the same questions I'm asking. I'm asking more questions that a person closer to the end of their life asks. And so then I said, okay, so if I'm making a book, what kind of structure would it be? And so it took a while to figure out. I didn't want to write a memoir. I wanted it to be not just I did this, I did this, I did this. I wanted it to be, what is it that compels somebody to make profound change? So what is it that catalyzes profound change? And we've all been through that. So I wanted it to be a story that anybody, not just trans people, could relate to, or allies, but anybody could go, yeah, I know what it is to leave a 30-year marriage or a 20-year marriage, or I know what it means to leave a job, 6 years before I'm supposed to get my pension, or any number of things. We all had to make real big changes, and you kind of go, is it worth it? Maybe I'll just stick it out and I'll stay in it. And people stay in loveless marriages, people stay in all kinds of things because the price is too high. So I started saying, well, what catalyzed me to make the changes? And that's how I frame it. What broke me open to finally go, I gotta do this. And so you go, okay, so then how do you do it? And so then that was kind of, what are the tools you have to do it? So that's kind of how I framed the story. And so I'm not really being encyclopedic or exhaustive about my story. There's so many things I could have talked about that would have maybe been interesting or helpful or amplified certain aspects of it. But it was, but I tried to make it really clear and concise about this idea of what catalyzes change and how do you do it, and how do you, once you've done that and you're kind of in your own skin, then how do you move forward? What's next? Because I say, okay, so now here I am. Now what do I do? And I think that's a phrase I use in the book. So now what do I do? So that's kind of where I'm at with it now. So it was an organic process, because I didn't have any idea what I was doing. And once I thought of a structure, it came much more quickly. But it took me 9 years to do. I'm a good writer, but it's a different thing writing a long form. As you know, having written a really long form, it took me 9 years. So I know you can relate to that. So.
I'm curious how many writers started writing because they couldn't find a therapist.
Probably all of us, right?
You said that, and I was like, wow, I know at least a few that started that way, myself included, maybe. Maybe one more question. I think there's a question in the back. They're actually literally taking the sides away. We are over time. Yeah. I could stay here all night and have
so
this conversation.
For coming, everybody.
But maybe we'll do one last question. Yeah.
Hi, I was just curious. What were two positives?
Yeah.
And two negatives you embraced that you didn't know that were going like the two?
Well, the real positives were that close friends who really love me still really love me. And I didn't know if I was going to get that because there was negative stuff in that regard that I was ignored and pushed away and all that stuff. That's the fear when you make a big change like that, and especially around something as hot a topic as this. I expected to lose people, but I have some really extraordinary longtime friends going, back many years, and that was such it was so heartening. And the other surprise positive thing was that I'm reinventing my career, which I spent 2 years crying in my soup, thinking my music career had disappeared, and now I see a way to move forward. I'm trying to figure it out. I don't really understand exactly how to do it, but just like everything else, I'm just taking the risk and doing it and trying to learn. And learning, I just ask better questions now about how to get there, and I ask for help. I'm not afraid to ask for help. And those are the two positives. The negatives are that the world is deeply troubled, and I'm more of a target than I was, and that was that was part of the fear. But that's kind of what it is, and so I have to take care of myself so I don't get really depressed and stuff. I have to have some processes to combat having my spirits go down, because that happens from time to time where I just feel really alone. I feel afraid, and so I turn to my friends for help and for support, and to listen to them and to share. So so those are some of the hard. That's kind of the hard stuff. That's the hard stuff. I don't have the second hard stuff. I don't think that's one. That's hard enough.
That's hard.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I know that Nikita's got copies here. Cross and Crows upstairs, I was going to say, also has copies, right?
Yeah.
Of the book.